and welcome back to the show. Today I feel very, very fortunate to speak with a wonderful musician, alto saxophone player, Steve Coleman. How are you?
Okay, all right.
So born 1956 in Chicago, started on violin and later around 14 played alto sax.
You did your research.
Grown up in a household where daddy played Charlie Parker records. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your musical upbringing?
I didn't have a musical upbringing. My father loved the music, but he wasn't thinking about me becoming a musician. Nobody in my family is a musician. And so it wasn't a musical upbringing. What you just described was this kind of the standard thing that was happening, you know, among African Americans in Chicago, because my father was born in 1928. And so his generation, you know, I mean, would have come of age, and you know, he's born in 28, so he would have come of age right around the time that Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Miles Davis, and those guys were doing their thing. So it was natural for him to like that music because that age group liked that music, you know. My age group did not like that music, but then I accidentally started playing alto saxophone in high school, and then later I wanted to learn how to improvise, and that's when I got into that music. So when I was around 17, 18 probably, was when I started listening to that music and liking it.
Right, well, thinking about Chicago, I mean, big names. I mean, we have Lee Konitz, we have Herbie Hancock, Quincy Jones, Von Freeman. How was the scene when you grew up there?
It was like you described. It was big. I mean, there was a lot of even not just the famous names, but there were a lot of good musicians. You know, not names that everybody would know here in Sweden, but there were a lot of really, really good musicians, and I didn't even know it at the time until after I left, and I realized how rich the tradition was. You know. But there were a lot of great musicians on every instrument. I got to hear Sonny Stitt like all the time, Von Freeman all the time. There were lots of Bunky Green, you know, these people, you know. So I was hearing like top level musicians even before I knew that they were top level musicians, you know. And these were guys who, many of them knew people like Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and all those people, you know. They played beside them and everything, you know. So it was a great experience because other than New York, there was probably not a better place. And the advantage that Chicago had over New York was blues. I mean, Chicago was a town that a lot of the people from the Delta, from Mississippi, Alabama, you know, places like this, they came up to Chicago to play. So I also got to see people like Junior Wells and you know, Buddy Guy and all these kind of guys, you know. So there was like this dual tradition there of what Von Freeman and those people were doing, and then the Delta blues, you know. And then my age group was doing like the funk stuff and everything. So it was like I viewed it as three things that I was getting, you know, the blues, the what people call jazz, and the funk, you know.
So later on in the late 70s, you made a move to New York City. You got to play with a lot of Sam Rivers' big band, Cecil Taylor's big band,
Thad Jones.
Mel Jones, exactly.
That's why I came here with Thad Jones.
And also as a sideman, you know, Michael Brecker and Dave Holland. How did those years shape you, playing with all those people?
Well, those guys were still vibrant in the late 70s, you know. I mean, Dizzy and those guys were just in their 50s, you know. I mean, and so it was a great experience because they were still very active. They were as active as I am now, maybe more, you know. And so a lot of those people were on the scene, and when I came on the scene, everybody was there, you know, all those people. I mean, people like Brecker and Dave Holland, they're not that. Dave Holland's 16 years older than me. No, 10 years older than me. 10 years. And Michael Brecker's maybe less, maybe like 7 years or something like this older than me, you know. So those guys were like the guys who were immediately there before I came there. You know, they were on the scene and everything. So the guys that you're naming, like Dave Holland, he was a young guy. You know, I was even just younger. That's the only difference, you know. And Michael Brecker was a young guy then, you know. And Michael Brecker was very friendly. He's one of the ones that advised me to come to New York, to move to New York. I met him in Chicago. And also Sonny Rollins, he was another guy who wasn't that old at the time, you know, and he advised me to come to New York when I met him in Chicago. So these guys were very encouraging, and they were very encouraging to young musicians, you know. So it was very helpful, you know.
Can you tell us a little bit about the birth of M-Bass and the point of doing it and where it started? And
well, a lot of people think M-Bass is a style, but it's not a style. It's more of a, for lack of a better word, like a philosophy or a mindset, you know, the way we think about things, you know. So, but it's not a style. It's not something where we say we're going to play this, and it's going to have these kind of rhythms, and this. It's not like this. But much of the public takes it like that because the critics, the writers, this is what they wrote. But that's different than what the musicians, you know what I'm saying? And so I don't think in terms of styles. I don't think in terms of bebop or hard bop or free jazz or M-Bass. I don't think like this, you know. But the writers think like this. And the people who sell records, they think like this. But for me, it's just one continuum of music going all the way back, you know, coming forward. That's how I see
Well, I mean, I've been a big fan of you for a long, long time. And I always have a hard time to try to count your music, so I just start counting it. So what is the difference if you say just, let's say odd time, you know, we have something in 7/8, whatever, or when you do something in longer cycles, and how do you practice those? How do you count it, and how do you rehearse it with your bands to make them so tight?
Well, the big difference is we don't count. You know, I mean, so that's number one. You know, because if I have something that's, let's say, in what you call 5 and what you call 7, I can't count both of those at the same time, you know. I mean, and I've been doing this a long time, you know. We think in shapes, you know. We think of the music, those sounds in terms of shapes and things like that, and these different shapes that we're putting together. But we're not counting. I mean, if you talk to the drummer, he's not counting anything, you know.
So you don't write it out traditionally. Here's a bar
I can
of
write it
5.
out, sure, but because I'm trained, you know, so I can write it out, and I only write it out with people who I need to write it out with. For example, I did a record, a couple of records, one called Synovial Joints and another called Morphogenesis. And on that record, there were some musicians who were classical players. If you don't write it out for them, they don't play it. I mean, they only read, you know, so there's no choice, you know. You either write it out or they're going to sit there, you know, I mean, you know. And so in those cases, you have to write it out. So me, the trumpet player, you know, we know how to write music because we're not just playing only with musicians who are like us. I'm also playing with folkloric musicians who don't read at all. Nothing, you know. I mean, no Western notation, you know. So how do you communicate the music to them? That's what you learn over the years. These are the things that you're learning. You learn how to communicate with a folkloric drummer from Ghana or from Matanzas, Cuba, or from Brazil or something like this. But you also know how to communicate with a violinist who's only played in orchestras and things like this, you know. And this is what I mean by it's all music. It's the whole, you know. Or I go to Indonesia and I play with some gamelan musicians. Or I go to India and I play with musicians who are doing ragas and things. You know, all these are different systems of music in different ways. You can't rely on just one. It's not just quarter notes and eighth notes written on the paper.
Right.
You know, if you're going to go around the world, you have to be able to relate to the world's music. A Chinese player is playing a pipa or something like that, they're not. It's useless to write out notes for them. They're not gonna deal with it. You know. So, and then even in my own band, some of the musicians are well trained, you know, and read well. I mean, well trained in Western notation, and some are not. Some are trained in other things. Myself, I'm self-taught. You know, I didn't go to Berkeley School of Music or something like that and learn improvisation. I learned from the older people, and many of them didn't read. You know, I mean, many of the some of the people you name, like Art Blakey and Elvin Jones, these people didn't read. You know, So how do you play with them? You know, I mean, again, it's the same question. You know, so I'm used to this. You know, I played with. I told my manager I played with one time with Junior Wells. This guy's not reading music. You know. I mean, it's not even close. You know.
Then you have to have a big heart to feel it.
Well, yeah, you feel it, but also you have to know something about the tradition. You don't just take a person in the New York Philharmonic and put them on stage with Junior Wells. I mean, it's a waste.
Right.
It sounds laughable. It's a waste of time. You know.
Well, I also know that you've been traveling a lot. You did a lot of trips to Africa and also to Cuba to study, like
And that's
the
where the
drums
experience comes from.
And also, what did that make to shape you as a musician to study African?
What I'm answering to you right now is because of all that experience. Everything I'm saying to you now is the things that I learned when I had that experience. Because you don't just say, I don't write out something for a drummer. You have to experience something with that drummer to know what to do, you know, to know how to communicate. I mean, some of these cases, the guys didn't even speak the same language as me. Not just the same musical language, not the same, you know, they're speaking Spanish or Portuguese or French or something else, you know. And so how do you communicate with them? You communicate with sound and with shapes. You know, and ultimately that's what I learned to do. I think that's the one thing that's reliable because it's the one thing that's real. You know, there's the sound and the shape. The notes on the paper are just representation.
In your music, as you told me about the beginning, all the blues and the funk and stuff from Chicago, like in your music you hear a lot of funk, a lot of jazz, but also a lot of African. I don't like labels, and I'm sure you don't like it either.
No,
but if you would put something, or if people, like in the old days when they had record stores, you look for jazz or funk, what would you classify your music as?
I mean, when I'm forced to put a word on it, I call it spontaneous composition because the element that links to all the things is the spontaneous composition. Most people would say improvisation, you know, but I would say composition because I know it's composition. It's not just making up random things. We're thinking about how to put them together and how to make them in a harmonious whole. And by harmonious, I don't mean harmony. I mean like fit well together, you know. And in that sense, I'm thinking of composition, you know. So I call it spontaneous composition, but I'm not the first. Like I said, the spontaneous part is important. You know, it's not music in the same sense as the Berlin Philharmonic. You know, I mean, it's music, but well, a lot of those guys originally improvised also. I mean, Beethoven and Mozart and Bach and all those people. You know, so yeah, I would say spontaneous composition. If I'm doing a very, very short interview, I might let the interviewer call it whatever they want to call it. They want to say M-bass, they want to say jazz. I'm not going to fight, but
just music.
But we're just dealing with the shapes, what we're feeling, you know, and how to put the shapes together. But there is a method. It's wrong to say it's just intuition or it's just feeling because it's not that. It's much more than that. I mean, we train, we study, you know, there's all of that.
And you've been doing this for a long time now.
Yeah.
What motivates you, Steve? What makes you wake up every morning and say, I'm going to write a new song or I'm going to make a new project, I'm going to go out on tour?
Well, I don't need motivation because it's not something that's separate than my life, you know? I mean, it's like asking you, what motivates you to eat dinner? You know, what motivates you to go to the bathroom? You don't need motivation to go to the bathroom. You have to go to the bathroom because it's part of, you know, you as an organism, you know. And so I feel like that about music. I don't need motivation. It's always in my head. It's always going. Even if I'm sick and I can't physically play the saxophone and everything, I still have a lot of stuff going in my head. I spent the night at Sonny Rollins' house not too long ago, and he said he can't play anymore, you know, because he has a lung problem and everything. But he said, Steve, I still practice. Everything's going on. I can stare at the wall and everything's still going on in my head because he's played for so long and at such a high level that it's part of him. He's not like just somebody walking around doing the stock market. You know, he's not that person. I mean, he's been doing it for so long. Sonny Rollins was at a very, very high level when I was born. You said I was born in '56. This guy had already played with Bird. He had already played with Dizzy. He'd already played with Miles. He was like at a very high level before that. So when you're at that high level, you don't forget just because your arm gets chopped off or you can't walk anymore or something like this. It's part of you, you know. So after a while, it becomes part of you. This band I started in 1981, you know. So that's 41 years, you know, and my record is to surpass Duke Ellington, who had his orchestra for 50 years. You know, I want to surpass this. That's my
well,
record.
that leads perfect into the next question. Where is Steve Coleman 10 years from now?
Hopefully, I still have the same band, and I'm still playing. I mean, I'm doing other projects too, outside. Like I mentioned, Synovio Joints and Morphogenesis. Those were other groups, you know. But this group is what we call flagship group, my main group, and I always from the beginning wanted to continue this group, no matter what else was happening. You know?
5 Elements.
Yeah. And I didn't want to change the name. I just wanted to continue the same group that was there from the beginning.
A few years ago, I was talking to another Coleman, Ornette Coleman, and I asked him for advice. And he said to me, well, the melody is always free. So now I want to ask you, Steve, just an advice for the musicians out there, how to keep on going with it. And
well, they should follow their passion. They should do what they want to do, not just what to do for money or something, or for fame, or what people think they should do. They should follow what they really want to do, because that's the thing you're going to do the best. And I would agree that the melody is like the primary thing. You know, I would agree with that. That's the thing that shapes everything else. You asked about counting earlier. We don't count, but we follow the melody. You know, and the melody is a shape that is sort of the anchor to everything. You know, even when it's a rhythm, you can have a rhythmic melody also. You know, but it's the anchor that holds everything together. And if you can keep that melody, you should be fine.
Thank you, Steve. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show, and I'm looking forward to hear you tonight.
Okay, all right, man. Thank you.